welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. David Anderson returns as Rutgers hosts Maryland in a pivotal game in the middle of November. Obviously, I guess we still call it early November. This is a must-win for Rutgers if they have any chance of going to a bowl game with Ohio State lingering next week, Penn State at the end of the month. David, I guess first off, emotionally, how important is it for this game for Rutgers to come out playing well? How much of a hangover do you think there is from last week's getting completely dominated by a team that, we thought maybe Rutgers should be able to hold their own against? And does that matter in this game? Is it all about matchups, speed, or what have you? I guess overall, after rambling this intro, what are your biggest keys or thoughts for Rutgers as they enter this game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll really know until that ball is kicked off tomorrow, Saturday, November 8th, because that was a pretty brutal performance against Illinois, and especially the Rutgers offense. I mean, Illinois' defense is not good, and they really saw the same problems in the red zone, and there was plenty of other times where they couldn't move the ball. So that's going to be a key to this game because Maryland has been notorious for getting off to good starts and collapsing late. But if they give themselves a big enough cushion, and we actually saw this in the game 2 years ago when Rutgers was down, I believe, 28-3 at home against the Terps, and Rutgers was able to mount a slight comeback, but the margin was just too large for them to be able to do that. So I think that, they got to come into this game fired up. I don't know what they got to do. Do they have to just return the opening kickoff, purposely not take a touchback, but then are they scared they're going to fumble? I don't know what Rutgers is going to have to do, but they cannot start slow. When Rutgers has been most effective this year, they've started fast like they did against Iowa, like they did against Minnesota, like they did against Washington, and then they struggled after that. But if they don't do that and they get in a big hole, they're not going to beat this Maryland team. But to be honest, these are two teams, neither of which has beaten anybody. Maryland's one conference win is against Wisconsin, who hasn't won a conference game, and Rutgers is against Purdue, who hasn't won a conference game. So the teams are relatively in the same space from what they've done so far this year, and we're just going to have to see, how that manifests itself. We can go into some of the matchups, but I think emotion, who cares more about this game, who just wants to be hitting the other team more, is going to matter in this matchup more than it does most weeks that we've watched so far this season.
Totally agree. That's why I started there. I know you have plenty of notes on this matchup. I guess from a Rutgers offensive standpoint, what can change in terms of execution when it matters most? We know that they're getting, and did not get so against Illinois, but overall, they get the first downs, they get the yards. I think they're in top 10 nationally, but they haven't been able to finish. They're not converting well on third downs. They're not scoring in the red zone. What can change against Maryland, and if it does change, what will get them there?
It's a tough question. I mean, I'm more trying to work myself backwards to answer it because Maryland's a defense that has been on the field for the most plays of any Big Ten team by far. Rutgers is one of the leaders in time of possession, and they might even be in first for most plays this season. So how does Maryland get around that? Well, their defense generates turnovers. That's one way. But then one of the reasons they're on the field so much is because they get a lot of penalties. So what can you do that's going to cause their defense to be bumping and grabbing? I don't think there's going to be, Big Ten officiating in this matchup that's going to be too favorable one way or the other. These are two newer comers to the conference with very little in terms of, who's going bowling happening this season. So I think Rutgers is going to have to try to put Maryland in man-to-man coverage because when Maryland's in man-to-man coverage, they do have a tendency to not look, and that's when they commit a lot of their holding and defensive pass interference penalties. Conversely, when they're in zone coverage, they might be the best zone coverage team in the conference, which is not something that we've said in recent weeks. I feel like Illinois and Purdue and Rutgers are the worst when it comes to zone coverage. So that's going to be a little different. Maybe we'll see some different type of plays because what happens with Maryland's defense, if a guy is in zone coverage, they don't just stand there like we talked about in previous weeks. They look to read a quarterback's eyes. They look to bait him. They do a lot of things they will play kind of flat, but if they know that if they see a route next to them kind of breaks the opposite way, they will jump to anywhere to try to make a play on it. So Rutgers has to be wary of those type of things. But from a rushing perspective, teams seem to be just running right behind their tackles. So similar to what we saw Rutgers do against Minnesota, where a lot of those Antoine Raymond runs kind of like right behind the butt of your tackle. It's not even really B gap or C gap. They're just kind of like running behind them because Maryland has some very young, very talented pass rushers. So one way that I think this started was teams start to neutralize it by running right at them. That's what the old school thinking is against pass rusher anyway. And because these guys are a little less experienced and maybe not as physically developed as they will be in 3 years, teams have had a ton of success running in that way. Not necessarily running straight up the gut, but kind of running behind the tackles. So to me, the plays that Rutgers has to be able to work this game are using that as your way of running to those spots. And if a guy's going to run a jet sweep or something, which we haven't seen much of, they have to turn it upfield quickly because Maryland has the speed, as you mentioned. They can cut off perimeter runs if you're running too much east-west. You have to turn the corner properly and then head upfield. They're pretty reliable tacklers, especially in their secondary and in the linebacking core, but you can run them over. Nebraska had a lot of success running them over, steamrolling them, whereas UCLA was trying to beat them with speed, and they ended up losing both. Maryland lost both of those games. So we've seen other teams have success going to their strength as long as it's not straight head up with Maryland strength on the Maryland defense, I should say.
Yeah, that's a great analysis there. I think, one thing that I've noticed just with Ethan is getting his confidence back. Obviously the offensive line struggled at times. Even KJ Duff, who had a great game against Illinois, even though a lot of it came in the fourth quarter, he did have a couple key drops. I think getting his mojo back is really important too. We've seen some of his runs this year. It's kind of lacked purpose. So I think against this Maryland team, I just feel like he needs to spring something. Either it's, a big play early, either a big run or big pass play. What are your thoughts of kind of where he's at right now? Obviously, he started really strong this year, but it seems like he's hit a little bit of a wall. Obviously, as the competition's increased, but what opportunities do you think are there for him this weekend?
It's got to be the balance of not trying to do too much while also looking for big plays. One of the things we were concerned about earlier in the year, though, didn't manifest itself, was he didn't have a lot of turnovers, but was kind of throwing balls into potentially harm's way that didn't need to be done. So, especially if Ian Strong is able to play in this game, Rutgers has to take advantage of Strong and Duff's size on the perimeter, whether it be you don't even have to be in the red zone to throw a fade at times, right? Maybe you could throw a fade 10 yards downfield just on a first down if you see they're in a simple cover one and there's kind of space back there, or maybe better against cover two. Like there's things like that where, I don't love the fade route, but Rutgers has to take advantage of their strength, which is they have bigger receivers, because if they can't, or if not even can't, but sometimes you'll see a coaching staff lose confidence in their quarterback. And we even saw this when Rutgers had Mike Teal, or even when they had Mike McMahon, who is an NFL starter in the as a quarterback. There's times where if the staff loses confidence in the quarterback, the defense can just, lick their chops and be like, all right, we know they're only going to run their base pass plays and they're going to run the ball. And Rutgers cannot get into that. So how do they get around it? I think that the pre-snap motion that Mike Broadbent highlighted, Rutgers has not been doing.
Yep.
I get why they're not, because they're having success when they don't do it. And it's easier for Shiraka and Athan to read the defense without the motion. I get that. But Maryland's a team that is pretty fast, and you've got to try to confuse them a little bit, or they're just going to be all over you. You have to make them move their eyeballs and adjust, because if you just sit back, you're going to move the ball some. Rutgers has the ability to do that, but that's not going to be enough, especially to kind of knock them out. Like we've talked about, Rutgers' red zone struggles, and Maryland's the same way. They can't run the ball in the red zone, so defenses kind of can see yardage, and then once it gets in tight, then they just kind of lock down. And so that's where I think that Rutgers, they have to be able to hit their big receivers and have some sort of a run game and wear Maryland down, because Maryland is notorious for not necessarily being the most fit team and wearing out late, whether even before this season. So Rutgers has to just keep coming, and make sure they stay close enough that there's a chance for them to win. Because even a 40 to 38 game, I probably like Maryland because I think they're going to be able to score points. But in like a 30 to 27, 24, Rutgers has performed better in those type of games than Maryland has this year.
Yeah, great points. I think to Mike Broadbent's tweets about the lack of motion and movement and all that. I think the predictability has really hurt this team, and I think you're not giving your offense an edge when you're so predictable.
Right.
And I think even just doing it to do it, right, to give a different look at times. You just can't not, it's like they took an entire option off their playbook that, is just making it easier on defenses to prepare for them. So to your point, I think, trying to figure out a way to kind of keep Maryland off balance, because they do have that speed. We know Maryland's recruited at a much higher level overall for a period of time now under Loxley. But again, to your points, there's, I think, some coaching issues there that have kept them back. And you have to believe that, you have to hope that I believe that Shiano and the staff are better coaching staff than Loxley, and they have to find, I think, those edges in the game, in those inches, to get them the edge or the advantage in certain spots. Defensively, we know where Rutgers is at. We know what Maryland, they have been able to score points this season. How concerned are you that that's going to just really kind of derail any hope in this game? And if Maryland jumps out early, can Rutgers catch up?
My concern is that they run a very NFL style, simpler offense, and they're just going to try to beat you with simple plays. And if anything, that's how Rutgers has struggled the most. They've struggled when like Oregon was just running basic run play. Now, Maryland obviously doesn't have the horses on the offensive line that a team like Oregon has, or maybe even Washington has, but it's Maryland's going to try to do what they do well, and that is not how Rutgers defense has succeeded in this season. So I'm very concerned about that. However, Malik Washington is a very, very talented guy, but he still makes true freshman mistakes. He still sometimes get confused by coverage. He likes to buy time by running around, but not actually tucking and running. So, and he's very good at that. I mean, I think long-term he might be Russell Wilson-esque, and that he can kind of just run around back there, and then eventually someone will be open and he'll find them. But he doesn't really tuck it and run that often. And even when he does, he doesn't have a good feel, oddly, because he has such a great feel inside the pocket. He doesn't always have a great feel as a runner. And so I think that's one of the reasons they've been hesitant to, A, not get him hurt, and B, just because sometimes his awareness isn't great. So I think the Rutgers defense has to do everything they can to try to confuse him. And then also, or on every play, they should either be trying to confuse him, or they should be trying to not confuse him, but force the ball to a certain spot. And really, it's on the defensive play caller, I guess, probably Shiano, or even in the game planning, that it has to be a mix of both. If you just sit back, this guy has an NFL caliber tools that if you just sit there in a zone, even if you're in a perfect zone, he's got the arm talent to just fire it in there and move the chains. So at the same token, if you play simple man coverage, he has NFL ability in terms of ball placement. He will always find defenders who are not looking and kind of throw it like over their shoulder. There's tons of plays that Maryland has, and I really like their tight end, Fleming, who's good at that, as well as their fast receivers. So you can't just sit back or they will kill you. And so, again, their offensive line has struggled to run the ball, which makes me feel like blitzing is more paramount this week than in any game, because a lot of times you're afraid to blitz because you're afraid the other team is just going to run a draw play or something and you're going to run yourself, overrun it. But they have struggled to run the ball so much that might not be a factor. Now, when they have established a run, they've had the most success, but there's a reason that they're far and away the worst rushing team in the Big Ten. And Rutgers has to not be scared to try to leverage that fact in this game. So again, to your point, I know Mike was a little concerned about just Maryland scoring a lot of points. Yes, if Rutgers has coverage busts, Maryland is going to score a lot of points, especially because the last point I'll make before I turn it back over to you. I remember watching Tom Brady, Peyton Manning earlier in their careers, and a DB would like fall down and they wouldn't even see the receiver in that area because in a veteran quarterback, they're looking for what matchup is open. They're not just kind of looking around to see who's open. Whereas a true freshman, or even we saw the backup quarterback for Purdue do this, like the less experienced guy is just kind of backyard footballing it at times, like, I wonder who's open, and then throwing it. So coverage busts, this is like the worst game other than, Altmaier last week that you cannot, he will just find the guy and throw it probably. He's tall. He can see over the line, no problem. And so I'm concerned that, there's definitely a way that this game could go exactly like the game last week. And Rutgers has to figure out a way to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That ties right into what I wanted to say is I think people look at Maryland's record and the 4-game losing streak, but I mean, they lost by 4 points to Washington at home. They lost to Nebraska by 3 points at home. They lost at UCLA by 3 points. Then they got their doors blown off against Indiana, which everyone's getting their doors blown off. So, yes, there's the mental challenge for them with a 4-game losing streak. But I mean, this team could very easily be 6-2 right now coming to Piscataway. They're not that far off from it. I think that people think that Maryland's having more of a down season than they really are. I think it's definitely a better team than last year. Obviously, Rutgers, they've been a little feast or famine against Maryland of late. And we've seen plenty of blowouts against Maryland. I think a lot of it is just the philosophy of the speed that Maryland has and that Rutgers just doesn't have. So I'm super concerned about this game, and not only for Rutgers to win it, but just for it to even be close to some of the points you said. And it just goes back to, where is Rutgers going to have an advantage in this game? What are they going to be able to do to give themselves that advantage? And then when they get it, are they going to be able to take advantage of it and maximize that opportunity? I think it just goes back to red zone has been such an issue this year on both sides of the ball. I guess any additional thoughts on what you think are keys to victory for Rutgers in this game?
I mean, kind of to your point, these teams' strengths are actually inverses of each other, right? Maryland's strengths are they got a quarterback and receiver combo that more relies on speed. They've got defensive ends that are pass rushers, not run stoppers, and their linebackers and safeties are just in the right place at the right time. Like, that's one of their strengths. So it's kind of going to be incumbent on Rutgers to really wear them down in the run game, and they can't be the first team all season that is allowing Maryland to run against them, or else this is going to get ugly in a hurry. I mean, the main takeaways is like, we were shocked last year because of how Rutgers had done so poorly against Maryland the previous 3 seasons, even with a lot to play for several times. But then last year, everything completely flipped. Maryland was the one who needed that game for bowl eligibility, and they just quit basically in, I would say, the third quarter in a sense. And it was because Rutgers just kept coming after them. It was like in Rocky 2 when Apollo's asking him, did I win? Did I really beat him, or what did you think? And he's like, I never seen a guy take a beating like that, and he just kept coming after you. Well, Rutgers just kept coming after Maryland last year, and somehow went from, getting run off the field 3 years in a row to last year us saying, and me personally saying, I think that was the best game Rutgers played in years, maybe in a decade. So
that's second
hopefully
half.
That was not a mirage. Hopefully there's something structural that allowed Rutgers to have that performance last year that they can carry over to this year. My concern being that one of the reasons was because all the seniors had great games in that game. Shaquan Loyal and some of the defensive linemen, and those guys are all gone. So what can they cook up on defense to confuse a young quarterback, and how do they make sure they punch it in on offense? Because I would definitely say, and I'm shocked at we didn't even talk about this, the line. Rutgers was favored by 1.5. Then Maryland was favored by 1.5, 2-ish, and then the line is back on the side of Rutgers. So I don't know what that's all about. It's one of the more bizarre things I've ever seen. I think from a talent standpoint, I think we're overselling Maryland in a sense because they have a lot of young, talented freshmen. But overall, up and down the roster, they have plenty of holes, just like Rutgers does. And it's a matter of, just not letting that speed beat you on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, great points. And I think from an edge standpoint, it's been more of a liability than not in recent weeks with special teams, obviously missing key opportunities for field goals, allowing big kick returns. If they could somehow channel it this game and, get the most out of their special teams in all phases, that obviously will give them an advantage there. I think, it's something that Rutgers, I think they're going to play to win 20-17. And I think that's how they want to play. So, Patel is going to be a factor. If that's the mindset, I don't know if that's the right approach. I just wish this offense would air it out as much as possible. I get that Maryland is not good against the run. But I think due to Maryland's speed and their explosiveness on offense, that's probably how they're going to approach it. So I think any edge you can get in special teams in this game will almost matter a little bit more because of it. Final thoughts?
I mean, and last thought on this especially is just Maryland. We haven't talked about this because we talked about blocking, tackling. Okay. The most important thing in football that we don't harp on is the ability to get off blocks, right? And because it ties to everything. How good is the offensive blocking? How good are you at tackling? How good are you at tackling angles? How good are you at maintaining leverage? How tired are you? And when I look at this Maryland team, when they get a little fatigued, they just cannot get off blocks at all. And other teams have found ways to handle that. Nebraska ran a lot of screens and made sure their linemen got out there to take advantage of it. That was one thing. Similarly, like Maryland struggles, I think, in the red zone defensively because they're a little worn down and they can't get off blocks. So Rutgers has to win in the red zone in this game because that's one of Maryland's weaknesses. Conversely, Maryland has also struggled in the red zone offensively and for a lot of the same reasons as Rutgers. Can Rutgers get off blocks, not have coverage busts, and just make sure that they are holding strong as much as they can? Because again, these games go all crazy all the time, right? But really the most likely thing to happen is that this game is going to be won by who's getting in the red zone and scoring touchdowns, because both teams have struggled there on both sides of the ball. Who can make that happen? Assuming Rutgers, doesn't have the coverage breakdowns and isn't just victimized by the Maryland speed, that's what should happen. Now, we've seen strange things in college football, but, if you played this game 10 times, probably 7 out of 10 would be decided by that.
Yeah. I hope it comes to that. I hope that Rutgers doesn't give up 17 big plays like they did against Illinois. I think that was the number. But that if that the speed just it worries me. I don't know. I hate to be negative. I think this could be a pretty easy Maryland win. But you know what? This team, to their credit, Schiano's credit, the program's credit, when they're on the mat, they always get up. And this is certainly a back against the wall moment. You lose this game, all your goals are off the table. You're not making a bowl game with 7 losses, and Ohio State is a daunting task still on the schedule. You do get the bye week, but still. So I think both teams have a ton to play for, both playing for, bowl eligibility to remain in the hunt for that. Maryland at 4-4 as well. So Rutgers at 4-5. We'll see what happens, but I think for this program, for Schiano in year 6, this is a huge game, and I think at home, I hope they get the support they deserve. I hope it's a full house. I kind of worry that it won't be. It's going to be a beautiful day, but if SHI Stadium could be rocking, that's also an X factor that this team is going to desperately need.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this isn't a game that we're going to look back probably in 5 years and say, oh, that was a huge game in the moment. But to your point, it's more how this is going to provide momentum either for the rest of the season, whether it be internally in the locker room with the fan base, perception, whatever it is, or not. And I think that, that matters more than the win or loss in the column in this game, because ultimately a win will do so much more to extend their season, like you said. But again, I'm not optimistic, but I'm not there's no path for Rutgers to win this game. There's a couple different ways they could win this game, but I do think there are more ways that Maryland could. And so that's my reason for pessimism. Hopefully we're talking in a couple days that Rutgers got their backs against the wall and got off the mat like they've done so many times before under Schiano, and we're looking forward to a bye week in the last 2 games of the season.
I'll sign up for that. No doubt. Rutgers, Maryland. Thanks so much for listening and watching here at the Faithful Podcast, and we'll be back with a rapid reaction after the game.